Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back through time to a place where the sun shines like molten gold on endless stretches of sand, where the Nile hums like a lullaby, and where sleep, yes, even in the age of pyramids, was treated with surprising seriousness. You're walking barefoot on warm limestone, the scent of lotus flowers lingering in the breeze, and somewhere nearby, a noble is trying very hard not to be disturbed during his midday nap. You, however, have wandered straight into history. Good luck surviving without sunscreen, a water bottle, or shoes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing this sleepy little community across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through a stone archway into the cool interior of an ancient Egyptian villa, whitewashed walls glowing gently in lamplight rush mats underfoot, and the rhythmic clink of servants' footsteps echoing in the halls. You're not royalty, not yet, but you've been invited to observe. Don't touch the papyrus scrolls. They smudge easily and the scribe gets cranky. It's roughly 1350 BCE, the reign of Amenhotep III. Luxor is alive with incense gossip and government paperwork. And amid the hustle of markets, rituals, and burial plans, there's one thing no one messes with lightly: nap time. You find yourself in a nobleman's private chamber, modestly lavish, if that makes sense. The bed frame is wood, slightly raised with woven cords beneath thick linen. It doesn't look like much, but after standing in the sun for 10 minutes, you'd gladly lie there forever. Here's your first lesson. Rest was status. If you could afford privacy, you guarded it like a sacred relic. And if you couldn't afford it, you napped sitting upright against a pillar, hoping no one kicked your sandals. Servants bustle softly through the corridor. One pauses at the doorway holding a tiny jar of myrrh oil, but instead of entering, he sees something hanging from a peg just beside the curtain, a woven strip of red-dyed linen. He freezes bows slightly and tiptoes away. You've just witnessed the ancient equivalent of a do not disturb sign. Historians still argue whether these physical cues, textile hangings, incense markers, even posture of small guardian figurines were standardized or purely household invention. But the trend is undeniable. By the 18th dynasty, Egypt had a deep, almost reverent sense of spatial boundaries when it came to the private act of rest. The reasons weren't just comfort or preference. In Egyptian belief, sleep was a brush with the divine. You weren't just recharging your body, you were traveling spiritually. Dreams were messages. The sleeping person was briefly untethered from the mortal coil, vulnerable to both blessing and curse. To disturb that process could mean more than a cranky noble. It might mean disrupting a vision from the gods, or worse, attracting something unwanted. Now you might think, okay, but it's just sleep, right? Tell that to an Egyptian priest who'd spent 6 days in purification rituals just to be clean enough to dream. Yeah, not a guy you want to wake up by mistake. And here's the kicker. While hieroglyphic inscriptions rarely translate to keep out some offer poetic equivalents, phrases like "speak only when spoken to" or "the soul walks in silence" were engraved near private chambers. And one obscure text even references the hush of Hathor, the goddess linked to beauty, sleep, and music, a polite hint to let her worshippers doze undisturbed. In the practical world, too, Egyptian homes reflected this attitude. Bedrooms, or more accurately sleep spaces, were usually located away from high traffic areas. Thick curtains or wooden doors helped muffle sound, and if you were rich enough, your entire sleep chamber might be separated by multiple courtyards, reducing the chance of some loud apprentice sprinting past with a broken amphora. Oddly enough, even the dead were given more privacy than the living. But that's for later. For now, you pause beside the doorway of a merchant's home. A cat blinks lazily from a sunbeam. A young woman, her arms glinting with copper bracelets, steps up to a wall niche and places a tiny dish of blue lotus petals beneath a carved falcon. She's not praying. She's leaving a scent offering another subtle sign this space is sacred, or at least someone's trying to get some shut-eye. So yes, ancient Egyptians invented pyramids, mummification, and calendars, but they also may have given us the world's first back-off I'm napping system. And when you think about it, that might be the most relatable invention of all. You ease deeper into the nobleman's villa, careful not to let your sandals squeak on the polished stone. Outside, the desert sun continues to bake the city of Thebes into submission, but in here the air is cool and still thick with the scent of cedarwood oil and baked clay. You've stumbled into a chamber of privilege, yes, but more importantly, into one of the most peaceful nap zones in the entire New Kingdom. Let's talk about the elite sleep experience in ancient Egypt. For starters, linen. You've never known true sleep until you've wrapped yourself in high thread count, Egyptian flax crisp and breathable, a gift from the gods, or at least the women who spent hours spinning and weaving it in shade-covered courtyards. The noble you're observing, he's swaddled in it, like a content burrito. His mattress stuffed with palm fibers, maybe even goose down if he's got serious favor with the temple scribes. This isn't just leisure, it's a power move. You see, Egyptians believed sleep was a kind of reset button, not just for the body, but for the soul. Nobles often napped midday, not because they were lazy, but because it was when the heat was unbearable and the spirits were whispering. Disturbing someone at rest was akin to interrupting a ritual, and in some cases, it was a ritual. Dream incubation, a fancy phrase for napping with purpose, was a thing. If you needed divine guidance, you didn't go bug a priest. You laid down, fasted, anointed your head, and waited for the dream to come to you. Mainstream Egyptologists agree sleeping chambers in noble homes were usually tucked away in the back, far from entryways and common spaces. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some sleep areas weren't rooms at all, but rooftop platforms with shade awnings. Imagine sleeping under the stars with a clay jar of cool water beside you and a servant whose only job is to gently fan away flies. Peak comfort, peak status. And let's not forget the pillows, or rather the headrests. You lie down expecting a feathered cushion and instead get a carved wooden stand shaped like a half moon. Sounds awful, right? But the design lifted the head just enough to preserve elaborate hairstyles and kept scorpions from crawling into your ears. Egyptian problems required Egyptian solutions. Now in the villa, you're exploring subtle design cues tell you this nobleman values peace. The door doesn't creak. The threshold has a carved lip to discourage animals. And a clay tablet mounted beside the entry bears a familiar-looking symbol, a reclining figure with arms crossed and eyes closed. No, it doesn't literally say do not disturb, but you get the idea. Historians still argue whether such symbols were universally understood or specific to certain families or regions. Was there a sleep iconography that crossed social lines, or was each noble household its own little kingdom of sleepy signage? The evidence is sleepily inconclusive, but what's certain is that silence was curated. Musicians stopped playing, kitchen staff lowered their voices, and in some cases, guards were posted not to protect from assassins, but from particularly enthusiastic messengers. Yes, Thutmose, I know your shipment of figs arrived, but the Lord is resting. And here's the fun part. Not everyone was allowed to request this kind of silence. If you were a servant, you napped in the shade of the courtyard wall and prayed no one needed you. If you were a scribe, maybe you leaned against your scroll shelf and caught a few minutes before the next inventory tally. But nobles didn't just nap, they orchestrated quiet. Even animals were in on it. Pet monkeys were tied gently to posts so they wouldn't scamper across the villa. Cats did as they pleased, but even they seemed to respect the sleepy mood. Or maybe they just enjoyed the excuse to loaf beside a cool jug of wine. You crouch in a corner as a young boy tiptoes past with a folded cloth and a shallow dish of herbs. He pauses at another door and places both items gently on a small shelf outside. The cloth is embroidered not with words, but with symbols of stars and closed eyes. It's the teenage daughter's room, and judging by the bowl of sleep-assisting herbs, she's trying to dream her way out of an arranged marriage. Can't blame her. The house seems to breathe with her. And there's one more detail above the girl's door is a miniature carving of the god Bes, ugly, muscular, and always grinning. You might mistake him for comic relief, but Bes was the protector of sleep dreams and childbirth. When Bes was watching, no demon dared sneak into your room. No nosy relative either. In that way, these spaces weren't just quiet, they were sacred. To disrupt them wasn't rude, it was blasphemous. So as you sit in the hush, surrounded by walls that have absorbed 1,000 dreams, you begin to understand. The concept of do not disturb isn't modern hotel etiquette. It's ancient soul preservation. It's a red-dyed ribbon by a curtain, a bowl of blue lotus on a shelf, a footstep that stops just short of the door. It's also a reminder peace was earned, not given. The household has quieted now. Even the cicadas beyond the stone courtyards seem to be humming a softer rhythm. You step lightly through a breezeway, brushing past a hanging reed curtain that tickles your arm with the gentlest whisper of motion. The Nile is a distant ribbon glinting faintly between rooftop shadows. Somewhere a goat sneezes. Peace, however, remains intact, but that peace wasn't always guaranteed. Here's the thing about life in ancient Egypt, the streets, if you could call them, that were lively. Homes packed close voices carried through windows, and every wall seemed to have ears, usually belonging to a gossipy neighbor. And still, somehow, people found ways to carve out silence. You're beginning to see just how resourceful that required them to be. Imagine living in a dense Theban neighborhood. On one side, a family of potters, clay scraping kiln crackling. On the other, a retired soldier who insists on telling the same war story every afternoon to anyone who will listen, including the cat. Above you, a rooftop garden where someone just knocked over a watering jar, and yet behind one simple linen curtain, a merchant's wife is attempting to nap. How with the help of well practiced social cues and an entire culture that, in some contexts, respected personal rhythms. Egyptians understood that the body, like the Nile, moved in cycles. Activity surged, rested, flowed again. Rest wasn't seen as laziness, it was balance, it was health. Inside home signs of rest were often subtle but widely respected. A servant humming as she cleaned might fall silent as she passed a shaded corner where someone reclined with a damp cloth over their eyes. Children knew not to run in certain rooms. Even animals were directed with gentle nudges away from sleep spaces. The social contract was unspoken, but clear quiet was kindness. Mainstream historians agree that daily life in Egyptian cities, especially among the middle and upper classes, was remarkably structured. Work was often seasonal, with long periods of downtime during that inundation of the Nile. Midday rest, siesta-like in style, was a norm, especially in summer. But here's the quirky part. Some households trained their children in quiet walking. Yep, not how to write, not how to swim, how to walk like a cat. Toes first, minimal heel noise. It was practically an Olympic sport of silence. You find yourself now in a humble home near the Temple Quarter. Less lavish than the noble villa, sure, but still charming. There's a clay oven in the corner, fresh bread cooling beside it, and on the far wall a painted symbol, a house, a reclining figure, and a feather Maat's feather, of truth and balance. Together they suggest a restful household, a gentle life. A soft warning, come in peace, or not at all. Historians still argue whether such painted symbols were personal expressions or commonly accepted visual language. Some believe these household glyphs formed a proto-system of signage early communication through metaphor. Others claim they were purely decorative. But as you stand there watching the mother press her fingers together in a quiet gesture to her daughter, a signal to hush, it's hard not to believe in their function. And let's not forget soundproofing Egyptian style. Walls were thick, built from mud brick that absorbed both heat and noise. Heavy reed mats could be hung in doorways, acting like ancient acoustic panels, and some doorways were framed with perfumed wax. When the scent faded, it was time to knock softly and ask permission before entering. Honestly, it's fancier than most modern apartments. In this neighborhood, word of mouth functioned like modern group chats. Don't knock on Hui's door today. He's ill and resting. Nefret's baby just went down for a nap. Keep your goose in check. You know, everyday logistical whispers between sunburned people trying not to lose their minds in the heat. And of course, not everyone got the memo. You spot a young scribe stumbling through the alley, scrolls under one arm, his sandal flapping with every hurried step. He barrels straight toward a painted door, only to be intercepted by a grandmother with a broom and a stare sharp enough to peel onions. He backs away, muttering apologies. She returns to her seat with a satisfied sigh. Guardian of naps, enforcer of peace. Inside the home, a gentle snore rises. You peek around the curtain. A man, simple linen tunic, ink-stained fingers, lies sprawled on a mat, a half-finished love poem resting on his chest. He's a temple scribe, exhausted from translating hymns all morning. And above him, a dangling charm made of beads shells, and what looks suspiciously like the dried claw of a small bird. A charm against dream interruptions, maybe. Or maybe just the ancient equivalent of a wind chime that says don't. You smile, because in this moment, Everything feels timeless. Rest was protected here not by technology, but by people choosing gentleness, by a culture that wove silence into architecture, gesture, scent, and symbol. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? The first Do Not Disturb sign wasn't a plastic tag on a hotel knob. It was the absence of footsteps, the presence of trust, and a grandmother with very fast reflexes. You move through another corridor, now this one narrower, lined with jars of oils and dried herbs. The ceiling is lower, the air spiced with coriander and something faintly sweet blue lotus maybe. You duck your head instinctively, even though the ancient residents would have done the same. It's a quiet part of the house, and by now you know what that means. Tread gently. Here you start to notice something deeper, an undercurrent of meaning woven into the walls themselves. This isn't just a culture that liked peace and quiet. This is a civilization that ritualized it. The idea of personal space in ancient Egypt wasn't framed like it is today. There wasn't a word for privacy in the modern sense, but there were behaviors, architectural features, and even spiritual beliefs that mirrored it. Temples, for instance, were designed in layers. You could enter the outer courtyard freely, especially during festivals. But the deeper you went, the more restricted access became. Walls rose higher, light dimmed, until eventually only the highest priests could step into the innermost sanctuary. That model it echoed in homes, public spaces in front, semi-private living quarters next. Then at the very back, perhaps up a narrow stair, or behind a heavy curtain, the place where you slept. Now don't get too excited. These weren't floor plans with walk-in closets and ensuite baths. But the layout said something loud in its silence. Some spaces are sacred. And that idea didn't end with walls. You come to a small shrine at the edge of a merchant's garden. It's nothing fancy, just a raised stone slab with a painted falcon and a bowl for offerings. But look closer. The inscriptions say something curious. May the house be light when I rise, and dim when I lie. Poetic, yes, but also practical. An early plea for peace. A hint that sleep like worship required mood lighting and minimal interruptions. Historians still argue whether this merging of domestic and religious spatial codes was deliberate or instinctive. Did homeowners copy the temple layout on purpose, or did both structures simply grow from the same cultural soil? Regardless, the result was clear. Egyptians didn't just build walls, they built gradients of silence, and the signs were everywhere. Step into a high-status home, and you'll notice a shift in floor material. The main area might be clay or painted plaster, but the sleep room carefully smoothed stone, easier to sweep, cooler to lie on, and as one theory suggests, quieter underfoot. Soundproofing New Kingdom Edition. You settle now in a side room bare but not empty. A low platform, likely a guest bed, sits against the wall. A basket of date cakes sits uneaten beside it, the offering to a traveling uncle who didn't quite make it. And on the doorframe, there's a charm, a reed bundle tied with a red cord. The color red, in Egyptian belief, had protective power. It was associated with the god-set chaotic yes, but also a fierce defender. Tying red cord near a sleeping space may have been more than just aesthetic. It said, this person is off limits. Disturb at your peril. The red cord, some believe, is a forerunner of many boundary markers in global culture, from Tibetan prayer flags to the red ribbons of European folk charm. But in Egypt, it whispered rather than shouted. There's a knock at the outer courtyard gate now. You hear it faint and deliberate. No one rushes to answer. The servant at the basin pauses, glances toward the main chamber, and resumes pouring water. That knock wasn't urgent. It wasn't even rude. It was symbolic. A test, perhaps. Will you break the quiet? Apparently not. Even public buildings had quiet zones. Within palace complexes, the scribes' quarters, those poor hunched-over note-takers of tax and tomb, were often placed near gardens or pools. Not just for atmosphere, for quiet focus, for naps between scrolls. One visiting dignitary once wrote of walking through the reeds to speak with the penmen whose lips were sealed like tombs. A poetic way of saying, shh, they're working. And if sleep and silence were prized by the educated, the elite, and even the ill, it's no surprise the gods got in on the action too. Some statues were put to sleep during specific rituals, literally covered, cradled, and blessed with lullabies. The god Osiris was associated with a form of restful death, peaceful regenerative, wrapped tight in silence. Even the scarab beetle, that iconic symbol of rebirth, was placed on the chest of mummies as a kind of spiritual do not disturb. You turn a corner and find yourself back at the noble's chamber. He's still resting. The cloth remains over the doorway, and beside it a new detail has appeared, a dish of milk, slowly warming in the heat. Not for him, but for a spirit and offering to guide good dreams and keep bad ones out. Because here in Egypt, even the unseen had to knock politely. You linger near the nobleman's chamber, watching the soft light slant through a carved lattice window. Dust floats like golden confetti, swirling in slow spirals. Somewhere far off, a flute plays hesitant notes, as if the musician isn't entirely sure they should be playing at all. It's the kind of stillness that makes even your thoughts whisper. And then you notice something strange, a series of tiny symbols painted not on the wall, but just above eye level on the doorframe. Faint, almost hidden beneath the layers of time, they resemble a sequence of hieroglyphs: an owl, a resting figure, a feather, and a pot. You squint. Could it be? Yes. This is one of the earliest forms of what we might call a symbolic message. Not quite writing, not quite art, but definitely communication. It says something like, be still, peace walks here. This wasn't an isolated habit. Across many excavated sites, archaeologists have found similar markings painted, etched, or even carved into wood or clay beside doorways. They weren't declarations, they were gentle suggestions, visual cues that this space was not for business, not for conversation, not even for chores. It was for dreaming. Egyptians had a visual language that thrived on metaphor. A bird might mean watchfulness or night. A reed could symbolize silence or delicacy. And a person reclining with arms crossed, you didn't need to read hieroglyphs to get the message. Mainstream historians agree that these symbols weren't part of official temple texts or monumental inscriptions. They lived in the quiet corners of life on pots, door frames, jewelry, intimate, domestic. But here's the quirky theory. Some scholars believe certain symbols became part of a silent social contract. If you saw them, you knew to lower your voice, to step back, to let the dreamer dream. You explore deeper into the estate, now finding a courtyard bathed in sunlight. A single tree stretches its limbs overhead, probably a sycamore fig sacred to the goddess Hathor. Her presence, it was believed, offered comfort and gentleness, perfect for a sleep garden. Yes, sleep gardens were a thing. Some upper class homes had special corners of their property set aside for rest, shaded quiet, perfumed with flowers or burning Kafi incense. The kind of place where you might drift off on a stone bench with a linen over your eyes and a tiny bell hung nearby, not to wake you, but to chime gently if someone approached. Think of it as a prehistoric motion sensor with charm. In the center of this particular garden sits an odd little statue, round, grinning, and kind of stubby. It's our friend again, Bess. You remember him from earlier, the strange, joyful protector god. With his lion's mane dwarf stature and cheeky face, Bess guarded homes from evil. But he was also the patron of music, dance, sleep, and protection from nightmares. His image appeared on headrests, cosmetics boxes, even baby rattles. And here's the delightful twist: in many homes, a carved Bess near the sleep space wasn't just for spiritual defense, it was a warning to humans too. Don't mess around here, not unless you want bad dreams and a visit from an angry imaginary lion dwarf. Historians still argue whether Bess was a full-fledged deity or more of a household spirit. His origins are murky, possibly from Nubia or Libya. But whatever his resume, one thing's clear: Egyptians trusted him to guard their sleep. His face said, "Don't even think about waking this person." Back in the main villa, the nobleman stirs slightly. You notice a breeze flutter the fabric hanging outside his chamber, red again, but now embroidered with golden thread. A tiny eye of Horus glints from the hem. Not just fashion, symbolic reinforcement. The eye of Horus, as you may know, was a sign of protection, health, and restoration. It wasn't uncommon to place one near sickbeds or tombs. But in domestic spaces, it also served a more immediate role. Don't break what's healing. Don't disturb the one restoring their ka. The ka, in Egyptian thought, was a part of the soul, your essence. During sleep, the ka was believed to drift, to connect with the divine, or even visit the afterlife temporarily. It returned upon waking. So waking someone suddenly wasn't just annoying. It was spiritually reckless. You might call the ka back too early, or not at all. Imagine explaining that to your master. "I didn't mean to, sir, I just dropped a bowl." And now his ka is stuck somewhere in the field of reeds, confused and barefoot. Oops, no wonder so much effort was put into preserving silence. Even in community spaces like workshops or granaries, sleep signals existed. Workers might drape a specific cloth over a bench or lean a staff against the wall at a particular angle, a way of saying, "Yes, I'm still here, but no, not right now." Think of it as the ancient Egyptian equivalent of setting your Slack status to away. So the next time you hang a cardboard sign on a doorknob, just remember you're participating in a tradition thousands of years old, and it probably started with a sleepy noble, a red ribbon, and a deity with a big grin. The nobleman's villa falls farther behind you now, but the air still carries its hush. You pass through shaded streets, their sandstone walls etched with generations of wind and sun. A pair of children skip stones near a basin while a dog naps with its belly exposed, trusting at ease. Sleep is not just for the wealthy here, but how you sleep, and more importantly, when reveals much about who you are. You find yourself in a temple courtyard next. Not just any temple, this is a place where even whispers feel too loud. A palm tree leans gently in the breeze, offering shade to a stone platform where offerings are arranged with obsessive precision bowls of figs, a carved alabaster jar of wine, and a ring of lotus petals that somehow stayed perfectly intact. Here, silence isn't just appreciated, it's expected, because now we step into the realm of gods, and gods hate being interrupted. At least the Egyptian ones did, especially during rituals. Sleep for them wasn't just downtime, it was sacred timing. The gods themselves were believed to rest between ceremonial appearances, and temples followed strict schedules of activation and repose. If the temple doors were closed, you didn't just barge in and ask for a favor. You waited, you left offerings, you read the room, or the courtyard rather, and the parallels with sleep etiquette are almost eerie. Take the Temple of Amun at Karnak, for example, one of the most powerful sacred spaces in all of Egypt. When the inner sanctuary was sealed, only high priests were allowed to enter, and even then only after hours of purification, prayer, and in some cases silence. They walked backward into the shrine so they wouldn't face the god's image directly, not out of fear, out of respect, reverence, the same kind of instinctive deference one might show to someone mid-dream. And here's where it gets wonderfully weird. Priests and nobles often attributed prophetic dreams to gods literally speaking to them during rest. That wasn't metaphor, it was theology. The sleeping person was a vessel, an antenna tuned to the divine frequency. Wake them too soon, and you risked cutting off the message. Worse yet, you risked offending the sender. Historians still argue whether sleep-related temple rituals were widespread or limited to elite priestly orders. But inscriptions from the time of Rameses II suggest that dream messages were taken seriously across social classes enough to warrant priests interpreting them, recording them, and occasionally blaming them when things went wrong. Why didn't you finish the granary roof? Because I dreamt Ptah told me to stop. End of argument. And gods weren't the only ones treated with sacred pause. Royalty too demanded sleep sanctity. You're standing now outside a palace annex, less grand than you'd expect, but refined in its simplicity. The columns are painted with lotus blossoms. The walls are pale touched with faint traces of cobalt blue. You know you've entered a different kind of space, because everyone here walks like their sandals are made of clouds. A guard with a shaved head and an expression that could sour wine stands at the doorway. But he doesn't challenge you. He raises a single hand palm, outward fingers splayed. It's not a threat. It's a signal. Stop. Quiet zone ahead. Inside a sleeping chamber prepared for the queen. Not that she's sleeping, mind you, but she could be. That's enough. The bed is wide and low, covered in linen striped with gold thread. A footstool with lion paw legs sits beside it. A small side table holds a blue-glazed jar and a folded cloth. But what catches your eye is the curtain thick woven from flax and dyed with crushed carmine beetles. Red again. Always red. And pinned to it is something delicate, a small plaque made of faience, sky blue and shimmering faintly. On it, a painted eye, the eye of Ra, this time not Horus. The difference Ra's eye sees everything, including your ill-timed footsteps. There's an ancient phrase associated with this symbol, to see without being seen. It's beautifully cryptic, but some Egyptologists believe it was used to mark sacred or sensitive areas. Spaces where observation was allowed, but not intrusion. It's not hard to imagine these symbols functioning like our occupied signs today, but with divine consequences. No one wants to get cursed for knocking too loudly. And if divine warning wasn't enough, the Egyptians also relied on something far more practical: trained servants. Within the royal household, stewards were often assigned as sleep guardians. That was their job title, not butler, not bodyguard. Sleep guardian. Their job was to monitor rest schedules, maintain quiet, and fend off interruptions. You can picture one now, gently scolding a junior scribe for daring to cough within 20 cubits of the queen's nap mat. Here's a quirky fact. One recovered scroll from Deir el Medina, a workers' village, includes a list of household disturbances to avoid. Among them, loud pottery, enthusiastic greetings, and unannounced entry during midday rest. Yes, even ancient humans struggled with people who didn't know how to knock. All of this temples, palaces, rituals, rules tells us something profound. In ancient Egypt, silence wasn't absence, it was presence, a sacred placeholder, a respected force. And you wandering respectfully among the quiet start to feel its pull. It's not just that you don't want to speak, it's that you shouldn't. Not here, not while someone god, queen, or commoner might be dreaming of something important. You leave the royal quarters behind with the grace of a thief, tiptoeing past a lion, winding through shaded colonnades, and back into the heart of the city. The sun is starting to droop behind distant dunes, now casting long shadows like sleepy arms across the sandstone walls. A breeze stirs the dust, just enough to remind you Egypt never fully rests, but it does know how to pause. You're about to witness how sleep and the right to sleep was never evenly distributed. Not everyone had access to silence, and that's where things get interesting. In this section of Thebes, homes get smaller. Courtyards vanish, the walls close in. These are the dwellings of bakers, weavers, fishermen, and guards. And here the rules shift. If you want privacy, you carve it out yourself, often with a mixture of creativity, ritual, and let's face it, some passive-aggressive glances. You slip into a narrow home that smells of yeast and sweat and cinnamon. A family of 5 shares this space. There's no door to the sleep room because there is no sleep room. There's just a corner sectioned off by a reed screen. But even here, a delicate symbol is scratched into the wall above a mat. A tiny circle flanked by 2 birds, an emblem sometimes linked to rebirth and sometimes rest. It's unclear, but it means something. You can feel it. The mat is neatly arranged. A folded cloth sits beside it. A small clay amulet in the shape of a frog symbol of fertility and peaceful transition rests where a pillow might be. The message is as clear as it ever was. Someone sleeps here. Be kind, be quiet. Historians still argue whether these humble visual cues held the same weight as those in elite homes. Some suggest they were local customs. Others think they were part of a broader folk etiquette understood by most Egyptians, regardless of class. What's certain is that they existed and that they were often honored. Now let's talk about sleep hierarchy, because yes, there was a hierarchy. If you were a priest, your sleep was sacred. If you were a pharaoh, your sleep was strategic. But if you were a worker, your sleep was scheduled. In Deir el Medina, the village of the artisans who built the royal tombs, life was rigorously planned. They worked in shifts. They ate communally. And yes, they napped together too, in shared barrack-style arrangements. Privacy was limited, but rest was respected. There are records of workers being excused from duty because they were stricken with the night breath or unwell in sleep. Not snoring, just overtired. That was enough. There's a wonderful and slightly hilarious ostrakon, a piece of pottery used for note-taking, where a man complains that his neighbor sang to the stars all night. Translation: he wouldn't shut up. It's ancient Egypt's equivalent of a noise complaint. Apparently, even the most spiritual of lullabies had a decibel limit. Here's a quirky twist. Some laborers wore necklaces with small charms to indicate they were not to be disturbed. A carved fish might hang from a thread or a wax figure tucked into a tunic. Was it magic? Maybe. But it also served as a visual code. I am off the clock. Let me be. You walk now past a market shutting down. The vendors are folding linens, scooping up spilled lentils, brushing flies from the last baskets of figs. And among them is a woman, older, maybe 60, seated in a low stool beside a clay wall. She has a cane, a jar of water, and beside her, hanging from a nail in the wall, is a reed charm shaped like a circle with 3 fronds. You've seen it before. It's not religious. It's practical. This is her home, right behind her stall, and that charm, it means come back tomorrow. She's done talking. She's done selling. She's ready to rest. There's no guard, no servant, no fanboy priest waving incense. But she's got a symbol, and no one bothers her. It's oddly powerful, isn't it? In a society full of gods, rituals, processions, and politics, even the humblest person found ways to say, I need quiet now, and people for the most part listened. You find yourself thinking again about the nobleman, his gold-striped linen, and fancy guardians. But here under the open sky, beside a market wall, there's a woman with no title, no staff, no jewelry, just a simple signal. And her peace is just as intact, because in Egypt the power to rest wasn't just divine, it was human. The stars are beginning to appear now, first one, then another, then a scattering like spilled barley across the velvet sky. You walk beneath them, the day's heat, radiating gently from the ground, the scent of river reeds drifting in from somewhere close. It's quiet in that ancient, meaningful way, not because nothing is happening, but because everyone knows not to break the spell. That's when you hear it, a scream, not a long one, just one of those startled, stifled sounds, like someone stepped on a scorpion or realized their goose has wandered into the neighbor's wine jug again. You follow the sound to a side alley where a servant girl, breathless and flushed, is being scolded in hushed tones by an older woman. Apparently she opened a curtain without looking first. Rookie mistake, because behind that curtain, someone was asleep, someone important. You can't hear exactly who, but judging by the woman's tone, she might as well have woken Ra himself. And here's the strange part. This isn't just an etiquette issue. It's not a slap on the wrist sort of deal. In some homes, disturbing sleep, especially sacred or ceremonial sleep, could trigger consequences far beyond a raised eyebrow. You're entering the territory of superstition now, or maybe something deeper, fear, ritual power. Let's talk curses. You've probably heard of the big ones, the tomb curses, the death shall come on swift wings kind of drama. But smaller, subtler curses were common too, especially when it came to boundaries being crossed. One inscription found on a doorway reads, He who enters without offering shall carry away the shadow of the one within. Translation: if you barge in, you're stealing someone's spiritual protection. Yikes. Historians still argue whether such inscriptions were meant literally or just symbolic scare tactics. But in a world where amulets were insurance policies and dreams were divine memos, people didn't take chances. Now imagine this: you're a middle ranked official with a flair for dramatics. You've just finished a long morning inventorying grain shipments, dodging tax collectors, and pretending you understand what the priests are talking about. All you want is a nap. So you place your reed mat down. You hang your charm outside your door, maybe a small figurine of Taweret, the hippo-headed goddess who protects sleepers. And then you chant a little verse, something simple, a sleep incantation, nothing fancy, but it's protection, it's protocol, and it's personal. Disturbing that. That's not just rudeness, that's a spiritual offense, a breach of ritual, and sometimes people retaliated. You pass a mud brick wall now and notice a faded image scrawled beside a doorway. It's crude, almost graffiti, someone with their tongue sticking out surrounded by tiny legs. Frogs, lots of frogs. It looks funny at first. Then you realize what it is: a spell, a minor curse. The frogs represent plagues. The tongue: a warning, disturb me again, and you'll be eating flies. This is passive aggression, 1300 BCE style. You'd be surprised how common this was. There's evidence from multiple sites of ritualized complaints, symbols left near doorways, small clay figures buried under thresholds, even letters inscribed on shards and accidentally dropped where the offender would find them. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night one. Recovered papyrus from the town of Edfu tells of a woman who was repeatedly disturbed during her rest by temple musicians practicing near her home. Her response: she baked 7 loaves of bread, stuffed them with crushed garlic and dried fish guts, and left them as an offering outside the temple gate. The smell alone was a curse, the message crystal clear, but not all enforcement was petty. In some cases, disturbing sacred sleep could bring formal punishment. There are scrolls describing initiates being removed from priesthood for failing to uphold temple quiet hours. One unlucky novice even wrote "I spoke" when silence was requested and was given over to the shadows. Sounds ominous. Probably just meant he got demoted. Probably. You find yourself back in a courtyard, the sky fully dark now. Oil lamps flicker in niches along the walls. You pause beside one, watching moths dance in its glow, and listen. Somewhere close, someone begins to sing. It's not loud. It's not intrusive. It's a lullaby, a soft, slow hymn to Bess, the protector of dreams. The melody dips and rises like a boat on the Nile, and the words are older than papyrus. Oh, you don't need to know the language to feel the meaning. Rest easy. All is well. Even here, after curses and warnings, rituals, and reputation, sleep returns. It always does. Because in Egypt, quiet wasn't just silence. It was protection. It was love. It was community agreement that said, you matter enough to rest. And those who broke that code, well, they got frogs. The Nile's breeze is cooler now. It sweeps in like a sigh across the city, fluttering curtains, brushing past papyrus reeds, and whispering down into the tombs carved deep into the earth. Yes, that's where we're going now, underground, below the bustling houses and sacred temples, beneath the perfumed courtyards and painted columns. Because if the living had rules about rest, the dead had fortresses. You descend into the Valley of the Kings. The air grows still. The stone underfoot turns from sun-warmed to cold. Torches flicker gently along the walls, throwing shadows that stretch like sleepy arms across painted scenes gods weighing hearts. Jackal-headed Anubis, guiding the souls of nobles' fields of reeds, blowing in some imagined paradise, and always, always figures resting, reclining, sleeping the eternal sleep. But even that sleep needed guarding. Tombs weren't just built to store bodies, they were built to defend silence. You enter the antechamber of a lesser-known tomb, now nothing flashy, just a mid-level courtier with enough connections to afford a few extra rooms. The door is sealed with limestone plaster, though a hole has been dug at one side, grave robbers likely. A problem as old as the tombs themselves, but above the entrance faded, but legible is a line of hieroglyphs, and it doesn't say, "Welcome." It says, "He who disturbs this rest shall find no rest of his own." That, dear friend, is a do not disturb sign with consequences. Historians still debate the true power of these tomb inscriptions. Were they real curses, religious spells, deterrents aimed at superstitious thieves? The answer may be all three. What matters is how deeply the idea of sacred sleep was rooted in Egyptian thought. To interrupt it was not just rude, it was a cosmic mistake. You walk deeper now, past painted walls that shimmer faintly in the torchlight. The sarcophagus chamber is a head flanked by statues of guardian deities. Sekhmet Fierce, a skin lion-headed, watches the door. Thoth, with his ibis face, records all who enter Gachun-Yu. And in the center, the stone coffin lies undisturbed, sealed silent. And surrounding it, spells. Not prayers, not poems, spells. They protect the dead from being awoken, from having their dreams, yes, even in death, disturbed. One chant reads, "Let not the breath of strangers break the wind of my stillness." Another warns, "Let silence guard me as Nut guards the stars." The goddess Nut, if you don't recall, was the sky herself. She arched above the world each night, swallowing the sun at dusk and birthing it again each morning. But she was also protector of the sleeping. Mothers painted her inside tomb ceilings so the deceased would rest under her arms forever. That's beautiful, and also kind of epic. You glance to your left and see a small niche in the wall, likely where a canopic jar once sat. But someone has scratched something there. Not a name, not a picture, just a tiny image of a closed eye. Delicate, intentional, another do not disturb in its purest form. Quirky detail. Some tombs also contained miniature beds carved from stone symbols of eternal rest. These weren't meant for the body. These were meant for the Ka, that essential soul spark we've mentioned before. The Ka needed a place to rest even after death. No one wanted a restless Ka wandering around causing mischief. That's how you got creaky doors at midnight and inexplicable goose attacks. In fact, entire trap systems were designed not only to deter grave robbers, but to discourage accidental visits. False doors, hidden rooms, decoy inscriptions, even cursed figurines buried near thresholds. And not all of it was bluff. Some figurines were inscribed with warnings, like speak not, step not, or your mouth will be closed in the West. The West, in Egyptian belief, was the land of the dead. Being closed there, that's bad news. You pause now beside the sarcophagus. The stillness is complete. It's not frightening. It's respectful. A kind of hush that feels earned, protected, deserved. Even the air here seems to carry a memory of silence, the scent of ancient incense mingled with time and limestone and loss. You look up. On the ceiling above the resting figure is a depiction of stars, rows upon rows, painted carefully. It's Nut again, arms stretched across the sky, watching, guarding. Because to the Egyptians, the ultimate do not disturb was eternal. But here's the twist. Tombs weren't just about keeping people out. They were also meant to let the Ka roam. On specific feast days, the family of the deceased would come to the tomb, leave offerings, and call to their loved one. Come join us. Come receive bread and beer. The Ka would rise feast and then return to sleep. That means, even in death, the Egyptians still had a concept of appropriate visiting hours, which is kind of incredible when you think about it. Even the afterlife had boundaries, rules, a sacred rhythm. And when no one was calling, when no ceremony stirred the dust, silence, total holy silence. You emerge from the tomb, slowly blinking into the moonlight. The air feels alive again, cool against your skin, humming faintly with the sounds of distant frogs and soft sandals brushing stone. It's strange, isn't it? For all the grandeur of Egyptian temples and tombs, the memory you carry with you isn't marble or gold. It's hush, a hush so deep it echoes. But we've spent long enough among the dead. Let's return to the living. And what better way than to stumble quite literally into the awkward, wonderful world of Egyptian romance? Yes, even here, among scrolls and statues and solemn rituals, love bloomed. Love letters were exchanged. And lovers, believe it or not, needed privacy, just like the rest of us. You step now into the quiet courtyard of a modest but elegant home. Clay lanterns flicker on the ledge, casting ripples of gold across the whitewashed wall. A small fountain bubbles in the corner, not loud but intentional. A distraction, a sonic veil. Someone doesn't want to be overheard. You move through an open-air hallway where perfumed flowers droop from hanging pots. On a wooden bench lies a folded piece of papyrus. No official seal, no wax stamp. Just a message left carefully tucked halfway under a weight stone to keep the wind from stealing it. You peek. Of course you do. It's a poem, a love poem, in flowing demotic script. It speaks of a girl whose breath is sweeter than resin, whose eyes are sharp as Horus's falcon. And the last line, meet me when the stars have passed halfway. Do not speak, do not knock, let the cat see you first. That last bit isn't a metaphor, it's a system. Historians have found evidence of romantic rendezvous arranged around the rhythms of sleep. Lovers timed their meetings to hours when households were quiet, just before dawn, or during the post-meal rest when the servants retreated. And they had methods to ensure silence. One of the most curious was the use of small tokens or signs, objects placed in specific ways to signal intent. A clay lamp with its wick bent sideways, a reed laid across a step, even petals strewn near a doorway in a certain pattern. These weren't declarations of passion, they were whispers of it. and they served a dual purpose. First to say, I'm thinking of you. Second to say, don't wake the house, because love in Egypt still bowed to the gods of sleep. You slip now into a side room, a guest chamber perhaps. On the bed, two pillows have been carefully placed to suggest a couple. A small statue of Hathor, goddess of love and joy, sits on the windowsill beside a bowl of scented oil. But most telling, the door has no bolt. Instead, a braided cord hangs from the lintel, looped neatly. It's not decoration, it's invitation. If the cord was drawn across the doorway, you didn't enter. If it hung freely, well, maybe love was in session. Historians still argue whether such symbols were widely understood or just local traditions, Egypt's version of putting a sock on the door. But inscriptions in love poems mention the act of passing the threshold with silence and closing the light with fingers, suggesting a culture that appreciated discretion as much as devotion. And here's your quirky detail of the night some lovers wore scented wax cones on their heads, not for hygiene or fashion, but to create an aromatic trail. The scent became a signature. If your beloved wore myrrh and blue lotus, the breeze carried her mood into the room before her feet even crossed the floor. Sensual, yes, but also practical. It helped people identify who was coming, who was allowed. Aromatherapy, ancient Egypt style. You step out again into the open air, just in time to hear footsteps, soft and deliberate. A figure moves down the corridor cloak, drawn close, face shadowed. They pause at a door, lean gently in, and wait. They don't knock, they don't speak. Instead, they reach into their robe and place a tiny item on the threshold, a blue bead, nothing more, and then they vanish into the night. The bead gleams faintly. You approach. On closer inspection, it's shaped like a small closest eye, a reminder. Even passion respects sleep, and maybe that's the loveliest part of all, because in a world where gods thundered and tombs warned and kings dreamed dreams that moved armies, people still found space for softness, for love, for secrets that spoke with sense, tokens and silence. In Egypt, the heart might flutter, but the footsteps always quiet. The bead remains on the threshold behind you, glowing faintly like the last ember of a shared dream. You walk on now, deeper into the sleeping city. The streets have grown still. Torches flicker low. Shadows stretch long and slow across stone walls. But not everyone is asleep. Inside a modest home near the edge of a canal, a scribe leans over his work. His reed pen scratches faintly across a piece of papyrus, lit by a lamp that sways gently with the breeze. The writing is methodical, neat. You creep closer, curious. The script is tiny and precise, a household guide. You blink. Yes, a literal list of how to manage a home, and near the bottom, a heading, hours of silence. You weren't expecting that, were you? Apparently this man, likely a servant or steward of a wealthier household, is tasked with maintaining daily rhythm. And part of that rhythm involves enforcing quiet during specified times. Second hour after midday meal is marked clearly as his last hour before sunrise. Next to each one, a set of small icon symbols for curtain closed reed mat, laid oil lamp dimmed. It's not just ritual, it's logistics, and it speaks volumes, because managing rest wasn't just for nobles or priests. Ordinary households had their own silent choreography, especially in shared homes where boundaries weren't made of walls but of understanding. You move to the sleeping chamber behind the scribe. There's barely room to stretch your arms, but the space is clean, intentional. The mat is woven tight. A water jug rests beside it. Above the headrest hangs a small wooden placard painted, not carved. On it, a crescent moon and a hand with two fingers extended, a subtle sign. Sleep is in progress. This, historians say, may be the earliest form of what we'd now call a sleep system. Not just random customs, but consistent cues, visual signals, habits reinforced over time until they became expectations. And it wasn't just symbols. You start to notice the use of objects in purposeful ways. A cloth bundle at the door means a baby is sleeping inside. A reed stick leaning against a wall indicates the master of the house is meditating or praying. A jar placed upside down outside a room that one likely meant do not enter unless absolutely necessary. Quirky maybe, but you start to recognize the genius. In a society with few doors, no smart locks, and zero written signage for everyday use, this tactile language of objects became the key to communication. In a way, it's almost like code switching, adjusting your behavior depending on what's visible. The closed curtain isn't just a barrier, it's a sentence. Now is not the time. You step back outside where the canal flows gently in the moonlight. A small boat passes pole-guided by a young man half asleep at the stern. At his feet lies a woven basket of letters, likely messages from one estate to another. You notice that each scroll is tied with a different colored cord, some red, some blue, one black. Guess which one means urgent? Not the red one. The red one means wait until morning, because even official correspondence in some parts of Egypt came with a built-in pause button. Now you find yourself approaching a larger estate, nothing royal but clearly wealthy. The courtyard is quiet. Statues of lions line the walls, mouths closed, eyes half-lidded in stone slumber. A servant sweeps dust from the steps with a bundle of reeds, but not harshly slow, even strokes that barely disturb the stillness. Then you see it, a row of small pegs set beside the main door. On each peg hangs a different cloth. This is a family code, a system, each cloth a color, each color a rule. Blue meditation, green guests present, gold meal in progress, red sleep, and just beside the red one, embroidered delicately with gold thread, is a phrase, "My ka walks, speak only to the wind." Now that's not just poetic, that's a warning. It means the soul of the sleeper is out on a journey. Leave them alone, lest you yank them rudely back into a world they're not ready to face. Historians still argue how standardized these codes were. Did everyone understand what a red cloth meant? Did it vary by city, by household, by social status? The record is unclear, but what is clear is the universal respect for what they represented. And this wasn't just about adults. Even children were trained early in what we'd now call rest protocol. In one preserved text from a scribal school, a teacher admonishes a student not for falling asleep, but for doing so without placing a marker. Sleep is a ceremony, he writes, and one must prepare the path. You glance again at the pegs, at the colored cloths fluttering faintly. You realize something quietly profound. These weren't just household systems, they were the earliest do not disturb signs, not made of plastic or hung on hotel doors, but of thread and silence, and the shared understanding that rest is sacred and worth protecting. You turn away from the estate and drift back toward the quieter side streets, where the walls are lower and the homes more modest, but the rituals of rest are no less rich. As you walk, a rooster calls out, prematurely optimistic about dawn. A nearby dog answers with a single grumble, then goes back to sleep. Even they, it seems, understand the protocol. Your destination tonight is not a palace, or tomb, or temple. It's a kitchen, specifically the rear room of a bustling household, where food is prepped, mats are scrubbed, and gossip flows freely, except right now, it's utterly still. You slip past a stone basin and duck under a low arch into a servant's corridor. A candle flickers weakly in a niche, but the air is hushed and the floors swept smooth. You peer through a curtain of braided reeds. Inside, a woman lies on her side, on a mat arm curled under her head. A simple linen cloth covers her, and beside her, just barely visible in the lamplight, is a chipped bowl filled with dried lavender and barley. It's her sign. No fancy plaque, no carved glyph, just this humble bowl. She has placed it there deliberately, and no one, not even the head steward, will touch it. It means, let me sleep. I've earned this. In ancient Egypt, even the workers, especially the workers, had systems, signs, signals passed down, not by scribes or priests, but through repetition, through gesture, through generations. Quiet wasn't just a rule, it was a right earned through calloused hands and sunburned backs, and they had ways of enforcing it too. You step lightly through the sleeping quarters. The mats are arranged neatly. Each has a small personal item at its head, a reed pen, a comb, a charm of Bess, and on one a clay token, shaped like a foot turned backward. You pause. That one means I don't want to talk when I wake up. Useful. Historians have found similar items in workers' villages, tokens carved with feet, closed eyes, feathers, even mouths sealed shut. They weren't official policy, but they were understood. And here's something quirky. Some homes trained their children to read the room from a young age. Not through words, through objects. A basket left upside down on a table meant the father was resting. A broken piece of pottery near a windowsill meant the baby had finally fallen asleep, so don't knock on the shutters. And let's talk about side eyes. Oh yes, subtle signs weren't always enough. Sometimes communication came in the form of a servant pausing dramatically in a doorway, staring pointedly at a charm, and then blinking very slowly at whoever had dared to rustle a curtain or raise their voice. It worked. In households that functioned well, the silent code of sleep etiquette was as strong as any written law. A well-placed bowl, a red cloth, a dried lotus petal in the corner, they could say more than a dozen words. In a way, you're reminded of modern signs, baby sleeping quiet zone, do not disturb. But here it was integrated into life, lived, inhaled with every breath of cool air after the heat of a long day. You move through the kitchen now, where a few coals still glow from the evening meal. Someone has left a cloth draped over the bread oven, a signal that no more baking will be done until morning. And hanging above the door, gently spinning in the breeze, is a cluster of dried reeds tied with black thread. It's not for decoration. That's a charm used to honor the quiet hours of the house's matron. She sleeps light, she works hard, and everyone knows the reed charm means whisper only or face the wrath. It's respected, it's tender, it's incredibly human. Historians still debate whether these customs were universal or regional, whether Thebes had different sleep signs than Memphis, whether fishermen in the delta observed the same codes as artisans in the valley. But everyone agrees silence in Egypt was a practiced art, and in the realm of sleep, it was sacrosanct. Even the language reflected it. You pass a doorway now with a faint inscription above it. The mouth closes and the stars open. A metaphor, yes, but also an instruction. Don't speak once the stars rise. The household dreams now. You stand for a moment in the doorway, watching the moonlight paint silver patterns across the clay tiles. No one is stirring. Every mat is occupied, every reed curtain drawn, every subtle sign in its place. And the silence, it's not empty. It's full of meaning. It's full of rest. The moon climbs higher now, brushing the rooftops with silver and casting long lines of light across the Nile. You walk softly through the cool hush of sleeping Egypt, each step a note in an ancient lullaby. Lamps have dimmed, conversations have dwindled, and here and there signs of slumber glow faintly, small markers of a civilization that respected the space between waking and dreaming. Your path leads you now toward a scribe's home, not a grand estate, but neat, carefully kept, with symmetrical painted shutters and a courtyard swept clean enough to eat off of. You pause at the threshold. There, hanging at shoulder height, is a rectangle of fine cloth, embroidered with a single hieroglyph, a lotus blossom half closed. The symbol for sleep. You've seen it before, of course, but here in this quiet, domestic setting, it means more. It doesn't shout. It doesn't warn. It simply exists, a gentle reminder to tread lightly that someone inside is lost in the delicate art of rest. You step through the entrance, no door, just a beaded curtain that sways like a whisper. The walls are covered in shelves, stacked with scrolls, pigments, reeds, and measuring sticks. And in the far room, on a low platform bed with carved legs and a linen canopy, lies the scribe himself. He is wrapped in a shawl curled toward a small clay bowl from which the faint aroma of kaifi still rises, a scent meant to soothe dreams and purify thoughts. At his feet, a wax tablet sits blank. He likely drifted off while preparing tomorrow's records. But beside the tablet rests a tool far older than any pen, a sleep charm. It's a carved ivory figurine of a reclining god, possibly shoe god of air and stillness, designed to ward off noise nightmares and unwanted presence. Mainstream historians have long noted these figurines in burial chambers, but among the living, that's less documented. Yet here it is, resting beside a man whose life revolves around words, who in this moment has chosen symbol over speech. You explore further, noting more evidence of intentional quiet. A reed mat rolled and tied with a black string in one corner. A woven basket placed near the doorway, empty, and overturned, another visual cue that this space is not open for interaction right now. Even the family cat has curled up in a neat, judgmental loaf shape and planted herself at the entry of the sleeping room like a feline doorman. You try to step closer and are met with an unblinking stare. Message received. It seems that in this house, everyone plays a role in protecting peace. And that peace isn't just for the night. You glance at the walls and see inscriptions, lists, schedules, records. One tablet records something peculiar. On the 8th day of the flood season, speak not in the 3rd hour. It is a day of sacred hush. Scholars still debate this kind of entry. Was it a ritual observance, a religious holiday, or simply a household tradition? The truth is lost to time, but the reverence remains. Some families, it seems, practiced scheduled silence, not out of fear or law, but to center themselves, to listen for dreams. You move now toward the back of the house, where a small water basin reflects the moonlight. On the windowsill sits a lamp, unlit, its wick trimmed neatly. Hanging above it is a strip of dyed leather, engraved with an eye closed in profile, and 3 tiny stars. That, dear listener, is not just art. That's a whole bedtime policy in one elegant symbol. The leather, when displayed, meant the household was entering rest mode. Children were expected to settle. Instruments were to be packed away. Visitors, kindly try tomorrow. And anyone who broke the rule might find themselves assigned extra chores, or worse, treated to the silent disapproval of a matriarch with a memory like papyrus, long and impossible to erase. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some households even developed sleep games for children that doubled as training. Hide the charm or read walk, where the goal was to reach a sleeping family member's mat without making a sound. It taught balance, awareness, and respect for sacred quiet all before breakfast. You hear a faint rustling, then the unmistakable sigh of someone shifting on a mat. Even asleep, the scribe has presence. His breath is steady, slow, peaceful, and you realize you're not just observing rest, you're in it. You are surrounded by the language of silence, cloth, scent, posture, light, and yes, even cats. You've entered a space where stillness is not emptiness. It is everything. The silence follows you now, almost clinging to your robes, as you slip once again into the still streets of Thebes. The city is wrapped in linen and moonlight, and your footsteps seem louder than they should be. You adjust instinctively, stepping toe first, like the children trained to move without sound. You're starting to learn. Tonight you're heading to a special place, a house known not for its wealth or size, but for its rules. A philosopher lives here, or more accurately, an old man who once worked in the house of life, the Egyptian term for scriptoria, where wisdom was copied and preserved. He's long retired, but rumor has it his home operates more like a shrine than a dwelling. You duck beneath an arch and find yourself in a small courtyard lined with clay jars and hanging reed lanterns, each faintly etched with stars and symbols of the goddess Ma'at, balance, truth, cosmic order. And outside his door, a system. 5 small wooden discs hang from nails painted with simple figures. The topmost one shows a closed eye. Below that, a hand held up, palm facing out. Then a line of rippling water. A seated man. And finally, a resting lion. Together they read like a sentence: do not speak. Still the breath. Rest walks here. Remain seated. Disturb not the guardian. You have no idea who the guardian is. Probably a cat. Still you don't dare test it. You sit at the edge of the courtyard and observe. A young woman approaches. She sees the signs. She hesitates, then takes the long way around. No knocking, no calling out, just a nod of respect and a detour. And you begin to understand this system isn't just for the philosopher's peace. It's for the harmony of everyone around him. Historians still puzzle over the extent to which such layered systems were developed. Was this a local innovation or a remnant of priestly temple behavior translated into domestic life? Whatever its origin, it's elaborate and it works. You peer through a slit in the wall just wide enough to glimpse a low table, scrolls stacked neatly, and the philosopher himself, reclining not asleep but still, eyes closed, breathing deep. In his lap rests a single sheet of papyrus held loosely like a fading thought. Beside him, a ceramic bowl filled with river stones, each one painted with a glyph. You can't read them from here, but you imagine each has a purpose, a message, maybe even a tone. Perhaps he rotates them depending on his mood. You wouldn't put it past him. Here's something quirky in one unearthed letter. A temple acolyte complains that his master had 3 different silence bowls, and I never knew which meant come back tomorrow. It's unclear whether this was an inside joke or a genuine source of anxiety, but either way, the system had nuance, and not just visual nuance. You begin to notice the use of sound as part of the Do Not Disturb code. Chimes, for example, not to wake someone but to warn others. In another courtyard, a servant ties a small wind chime made of shells and copper to a pergola beam. When someone walks through the breezeway too fast, it jingles gently. A subtle alarm, a signal to slow down. In some homes, stringed instruments were placed just inside the threshold, with one note intentionally detuned, so if someone came in uninvited and brushed it, it would produce a wrong note alerting the household. Music as a tripwire. Now that's poetic security. You circle back to the philosopher's street, just in time to see a neighbor pause outside. She holds something an offering, maybe a covered basket. She studies the symbols, then sets the item down gently on the doorstep and slips away without a sound. No knock, no word. Just the mutual understanding that now is not the time. That's the essence of it all, really. Egyptians didn't invent silence, but they shaped it. They sculpted it into rituals, objects, gestures. They handed it down, passed it on, built it into their walls and courtyards and beds and tombs. They respected it not as emptiness, but as presence, the presence of thought, of soul, of dream. And you moving through their world like a respectful ghost, start to feel the rhythm of that silence. It hums in your ears. It slows your steps. It settles in your chest. And somewhere behind that heavy linen curtain, a philosopher's mouth turns upward into the faintest smile. Because you didn't knock. You understood. You walk one last stretch beneath the stars of ancient Egypt. The path ahead narrows framed by adobe walls, still warm from the sun's memory. A fig tree sways overhead, its branches heavy and whispering in the breeze. Every footstep feels softer now, not because the ground has changed, but because you have. You know the code. You read the signs without thinking. A ribbon tucked into a gate latch, someone's praying. A reed bundle placed upside down, someone's grieving. A sandal turned sideways at the threshold, someone's dreaming. You notice everything now. Tonight your final stop is a house so ordinary it almost disappears into the street. No wealth, no temple connections, no scribal status. Just a modest, clean home. But its doorway is framed with care, whitewashed, freshly swept, and decorated with a single daub of red ochre on the left-hand side. That's the signal here. You remember red near the left, means let the house rest. You respect it, and then you spot something new. Above the door, strung on a length of palm fiber, hangs a small amulet, handmade, uneven, and completely perfect. It's shaped like a heart, not the cartoon kind, the Egyptian kind, the eye be the seat of the soul. It sways gently in the evening breeze. A child made this most likely. You imagine little fingers carefully pressing clay into shape, maybe asking their mother, will this help Dad sleep longer? Maybe it did. In homes like these, the signs aren't scribed or chiseled. They're improvised, intuitive, passed down like a lullaby no one remembers writing. Inside the house, soft breathing rises and falls. A family tucked beneath linen sheets. A dog curled in the corner. A single oil lamp casting one final flicker against the far wall before surrendering to the dark. Outside, the world holds its breath with them, and it's then you realize the first do not disturb sign wasn't a plaque or a phrase. It was an understanding, a woven gesture, a scented bowl, a pause before knocking, a culture that saw sleep not as idleness, but as something sacred, something worth protecting with charms and curtains and quiet steps. Historians still argue where it began, who made the first gesture, who tied the first ribbon, but the truth may be simpler than that. Maybe it wasn't invented. Maybe it just was, because in the stillness of Egypt, the people knew what mattered: rest, recovery, the unseen journeys of the soul, drifting like mist across the Nile. And now, dear friend, we come to the close. The city sleeps. The symbols are in place, and you, having walked its quiet corridors, peeked into its dreams, respected its signs, can rest too, because here finally, no one will disturb you. Let yourself stay in this stillness just a while longer. Feel the hush settle over your shoulders like a soft linen shawl, warm from the day, but cooling with the night. The rhythm of the Nile, that steady pulse of life, has slowed to a lullaby. Even the air breathes slower here, slower and deeper. There's no need to remember the names, the symbols, the rituals. You've already lived them gently and silently, step by quiet step. You've walked the reed mats, paused at the thresholds, read the messages not written in ink, but laid in lotus petals and shadows. The stars above still shine bright, distant, unchanged, since the nights when pharaohs dreamt beneath them. And now they shine for you too. You are safe here. You are part of something ancient and tender and wise. So if your thoughts come to you, still let them drift like little boats on the Nile. No paddles, no purpose, just floating on the current of rest. You don't need to guide them. You don't need to do anything at all. Let your breathing soften. Let your body be cradled by the quiet. Let your mind at last grow weightless. And if you dream, may it be gentle, may it be long, and may no one disturb you.